Hello and welcome to Father-Son Flight Simulator. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I organize scenery and how I get scenery into X-Plane for my flying pleasure and for years. I know this is a huge topic of discussion, particularly among newer simmers. And I see invariably on a lot of the forums and Facebook groups out there that there's a lot of questions about how to do it. As new pilots come along and learn how to, do custom scenery. So I thought I would do a little bit about how I organize custom scenery and how I go about getting scenery and getting them organized so that they all work appropriately in X-Plane. So if you don't already know, there are a couple of great places to get free scenery and even purchase scenery. If you want to get free scenery, which is the most of, you want to go to xplane.org first, and you'll go to the downloads and go to the scenery section. You'll see there's just a ton of community airports out there and sceneries and even regional sceneries out there that might be in the area of interest for you. And who knows, you might find something you like there that is perfectly fine. The user community is really great with X-Plane. It's one of its strengths, and you can really get a lot of good stuff by going to these sites and downloading them and installing them. Another great place to get scenery is on the gateway. So if you have like maybe an obscure airport or an airport that's not quite as known, then a lot of community users out there design scenery and they post them to the X-Plane Scenery Gateway, and you can search for airports that might be of interest to you and to see if somebody somewhere has done a airport that you might be interested in, and they're always being updated and changed. The only stipulation with the X-Plane Scenery Gateway is if somebody develops something for the gateway, they have to use the default X-Plane libraries. So another benefit of using X-Plane Scenery Gateway is that you don't have to download any special libraries to get them to work. And I'll leave all of these links in the show description below. Another great place to get scenery if you're not interested in orthos is the 11 HD Mesh Scenery 4 by I believe it's Owl Pilot, sorry, and I'll leave the show links below. So you can get a lot of good generated scenery from this, and it covers quite a lot. Each square here represents one area of the HD Mesh scenery. And you can get quite a large area just by downloading one square here, and you'll see the squares that are available. And I'll explain a little bit about what this is and how it differs from orthos. So, what is HD Mesh scenery anyway? Well, the way X-Plane works is, I explained before, you have a wireframe that is default scenery, the default elevations of the world. And this basically works off of triangles. And what the mesh scenery does is it takes that triangle and then it populates it with a scenery type of what that scenery is. So for instance, that scenery type could be a forest, or it could be an urban area or a city, or it could be grassland, or it could be desert, or it could be, let's say, I don't know, a frozen tundra or plateau or something, or a glacier. So it just takes that scenery, fills it in with sort of an autogen type of scenery, and then that builds your world for you. And then on top of that is your overlays, which would be your actual trees, buildings, and so on and so forth, which is on the layer on top of it. Well, what HD Mesh does is it takes the sceneries. Now you see this is the original. It takes the sceneries and it makes these triangles far finer, for smaller, so to speak. And what that does is it allows you to have a much better resolution. So here's the before example, and then here's what it looks like after. So it just takes those triangles and makes them much smaller, and it does that at the expense of memory. So the higher the resolution, say, the smaller those triangles are, the higher resolution, the more memory that's going to take. I use the HD mesh. There's also some areas on the site that has ultra HD mesh if you want even more memory and more fine. But the bottom line is this is all autogen type scenery, and that's how that scenery works. You can see, like in the original, there's going to be jagged edges along this river, but as you increase the resolution, it's much more smooth, and you get much more degradation, and you get much more variation in your. It doesn't look so blocky, so to speak. Now, what does orthos do? Well, it replaces all of that with satellite imagery, and this is an example of certain satellite imageries, which then gives you, sort of a real, what it looks like in the real world, and it's not going to use that autogen scenery type anymore. It's just going to lay the photographs on top of the wire mesh, and because of that, orthos tend to be smoother. You tend to get a larger frame, or you get higher frames because of it, and that's because the X-Plane doesn't have to autogen and fill in all of those little triangles with autogen type scenery. And then on top of that, you're going to have your overlay street maps and your buildings anyway. So you still get the autogen. Here's another example. So you see this is ortho scenery, but on top of that is your looks like World to X-Plane autogen scenery or something. On top of that, you have your roads on top of the satellite photos. And it makes the world, especially if you're familiar with the area, it just really makes it look like you're really there. And there's differences with orthos with how fine you make or how high resolution you make it. Of course, there's a cost between how much memory you need and the what they call the zoom level of the orthos. But those are the two options you have. If you use orthos, then your mesh will go on the bottom, and then your satellites imagery will go on top of it, and then that gives you a real world type of look. And then on top of that has to be all of your street maps and your buildings. And if you're interested in orthos and you're not really comfortable using the Ortho for XP, again, you can go back here into xplane.org, and there's a US orthos category, or US orthos are a great way to start with orthos. So without further ado, let me explain a little bit about how you order and make sure you get your custom sceneries in the right order so that they all work and are no errors in when they load up for you in the actual simulator. So there are basically three ways to order your scenery. The first way is to go directly into the custom scenery folder in X-Plane. So it'll be whatever your X-Plane folder is, there'll be a folder there called custom scenery, and you'll see a little file there called scenery packs ini, and you'll want to open this in Notepad. And there's all of the sceneries that I have added, and the libraries, the orthos, the HD mesh, all of the ones that I've put into the simulator are here. And what's important about this is that it orders from top to bottom, the most important to the least important. So what that means is, if you think of these things as layers, then the top layer is going to be at the top and the bottom layer is going to be at the bottom. So what is each layer? Well, the first layer, the most important, is going to be all of your airports. And the reason for this is because they sit on top, and the last, the ones that are most visible are the airports. They're on the top of all of the layers. And so you want them to right on top. So all you have to do is you select the line, which is an airport. You click cut, and you click paste, and you put it up at the top. The next layer is going to be any of your regional sceneries. So for me, I have them all here, right? And I put also a little identifier on all of them. So if it's a regional scenery, I put a little O. O stands for objects, underscore, and then the two-letter state code or country code where it resides. I do the same for the airports. I use A underscore uh, and then the two-letter identifier code for the state or the country that it's located in. I just rename the file to do that. And there's a reason why I do that, but I'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, so then you have all of your libraries after that. And then you'll have your overlays underneath that, your objects and overlays. That's where you're going to have all of your streets, your buildings, your autogen streets. Underneath that are all of your orthos. And underneath that is your mesh. Right? So if you think of the mesh, this is sort of the wireframe of the elevations of the earth or all the land. So this is where you get your mountains and you get your your where the water is located and all that kind of stuff. So you want to build that first. That is your sort of like your ground elevations and your default sceneries. Then you have your orthos, which are going to sit on top of that. Then you have your overlays, your buildings, your streets, and all that on top of that. Your libraries, they can really be anywhere, but I put them in between the overlays and then any of the objects on top of that. I have my regional sceneries on top of that, and then finally my airports are the last, so they go on top. So you can go into your scenery packs ini file and just cut and paste all of these lines to the right location, save the ini file, and boom, you're ready to go. However, to me, once you start getting lots and lots of sceneries, it gets very difficult to do that. Now, I mentioned that I like to change the name of the folders here to put a little identifier. The reason why I do that is because the alternate way of doing this is if you have that ordering in alphabetical form, then the other way of doing this is you can just create in the ini backup, you just back it up like this. You just put .bak on it, but through a rename, and then you start Xplane. And what Xplane is going to do is it's going to rewrite the scenery ini file based on the alphabetical order of all of the files that you put in there. So that's another way to do it. You can change it, alphabetize everything, and it will build for you a scenery packs ini file based on all that. But it requires you to put these types of three-letter identifiers in there anyway, and so that it has the right alphabetical ordering. And this is the reason why orthos have a Z in front and why your meshes have a triple Z underneath them, right? Now, once you get lots of sceneries, then I use ExOrganizer. Now, what is ExOrganizer? ExOrganizer is an app which attempts to organize your sceneries and your plugins. And I'm going to go a little bit about how it works. It's going to first try to auto-detect your lines and place them into the appropriate layer. And then anything that it doesn't know what it is, it puts into this needs attention. Right? So right now you can see I'm completely in order. I don't have anything that needs attention. So what you do is you just make sure that Xplane has done everything for you, and if where it hasn't, you just drag and drop it where it should go. So what it's going to do is going to try to order all of your airports and your sceneries into the right folder. And then where it is unable to do that, you can just drag them into the correct place. And so you can see all my California airports. You can see that it's recognized them all as an airport, and it's put them in. Now, I had a couple of these that it didn't find right away, and it put it into the needs attention. I just drag them into where it goes. And that's easy to do. Now, once you do that, you could say over here on the right, you can scan for potential scenery problems. It will run a scan of your airports without having to start, or all of your sceneries without having to start Xplane. It's going to give you a little idea here if you have any problems, and it says I don't have any problems. All right, so these are all like standard scripts. If you have anything in these folders, or if you have anything that's in these categories, it's going to add to it. So see, it says it. Not sure if this is really an airport, so it highlighted that to make sure that, hey, make sure that's really an airport and it's in the folder. So I'm going to hide the scan. Once you have everything in the right place, you just click this button, and then it rewrites your scenery ini file for you, and it puts everything in the same order as it's supposed to go based on where you have them in the city. So there's no copy and paste, there's no opening the notepad file. You just go ahead and move them, just drag and drop them in, hit this, and boom, it creates your custom scenery file, and you can see it. Okay, so let me hide that. Now, once I save, or I have autosave on, so once I exit this, it will save that, and then I can also start Xplane directly from here and go into it, and it will start with that that scenery ini file already written for me. So where some of the confusion lies is that, hey, it did, you know, I hear often on the forums, ExOrganizer didn't work for me because it wasn't able to detect that my scenery was an airport. It wasn't able to detect that I had world to Xplane in there, or over street maps, over scenery street maps, or it didn't recognize my regional sceneries. And you know what? It's going to do its best to do that, but you still have to know what everything is, so that if it has something allocated into the wrong place, you can move it and drag it in to where you needed to go without having to open the scenery file, and you can write the scenery packs file without having to start Xplane. And you can do checks to make sure that all your libraries are good and all of that. So it still needs you to understand what folders you're putting in there. It's going to do its best to try, but you still have to, you know, make sure that, you know, all the airports you put in there are actually in the right place. You know, so when you add new scenery, that becomes really easy. You just add the new scenery in, you scan, and it will try to find out where it goes, and then you just make sure that it's in the right place, and then you go ahead and write the scenery packs ini, and boom, it will reflect the codes, and that is where it should go based on what you've said. Okay, now the other advantage you get from ExOrganizer, particularly in scenery, is you can actually manage versions here, which I've done in a couple of cases. I have some where I know what the scenery version is. I wasn't doing this at first, that's why not all of them are populated, but I can go ahead and put the version in, and then that way, if there's an update, I can go ahead and check in here to see which version it is, and see if I can add or change version, right? Please input the new version. I could put a new number in there and then click OK, and then would update the version number. And then that way I can also check to see if I'm not sure if there's an update. I can check to see if I have the latest version or if there's a new version. Now you can also check to see if there's any library problems without having to start Xplane. So for instance, I can go in and say, okay, let's scan to see if it's finding all of the libraries, all the custom libraries I need to run each of these airports. You can go ahead and run the scan, and you see it's going through all my airports, and then it's going to give me a list of everything it found, all the libraries I have, and it's going to tell me, okay, this one's okay, this one's okay, this one's okay. It gives me a little bit of a problem on this one. So it says here that Petersburg James Johnson Airport in Alaska, I have a couple of objects in there that don't appear to be in the library, and I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it was deleted from the library. Maybe I have the wrong version of the library, but you can see that it's pointing out, without having to go into Xplane and find that missing from the airport, I can see it right here that it says, hey, you need to update the PM library, right? And you know, most of them are okay. Some of them it's gonna, so for instance, this is the Xplane global scenery airports. It said it skipped over that because that's not really custom scenery. Same with these, skipped over these because it didn't have any Earth nav data. And then you know, so it gives me sort of a check to see that all of my airports are good, that I have all the libraries that are required, and if I need to find a library, it tells me. hey, you're missing this library, or you need to update that library, and then I can go and take action to look for it if I'm going to fly in that area. So then I can hide the scans. Now the other thing it does, and as you start to get really into X-Plane, you're going to find that you're going to want scripts, you're going to want plugins like Better Pushback or AutoGate or Data Ref Editor or something like that, or maybe even when you buy an airplane, like if you buy the Flight Factor A320, it's got a plugin of its own, and you can come in here and you can turn those things on or off by default. So if you find that you're constantly turning, for instance, X camera, you're constantly disabling that in the game, you can actually come in here and uncheck that, and then it won't bother loading that up, and it won't appear in your screen. So you can also manage your plugins this way too. Now I have a data ref editor, which is something that is basically it's supposed to be for developers, so it's very critical that you don't accidentally change the data ref editor by accidentally going and turning it on and then changing a parameter in your data ref editor. It could actually damage your airplane. So with ExOrganizer, I turn the data ref editor off, and therefore you don't have access to that once you're playing the game. All right. Now you can also look at your Fly with Lua scripts. So if I have, for instance, I have 3J FPS Wizard, right? And I could turn that off, and then I won't have access to it anymore once I load it up, right? So I can default off. Now, I can also, my son put on this 3J cabin sounds, and and it's funny because in the last video when I was flying the P-38, you can hear the cabin sounds. So I was flying a P-38 Lightning World War II plane, and you can hear the video for the passengers going off in the background. And so maybe when I'm flying, I won't want that to be on, so I can just turn that off here, and it'll be easier. And when I walk into or when I start X-Plane, I won't have to worry about it. Also, in your Python scripts, it will also do the same thing. So you have your Fly with Lua scripts and you have your Python scripts here, and you can turn them on and off by default if you want. So it gives you a little bit of power to control your plugins, your scripts on X-Plane as well. So it's not just for scenery. This is a really great tool. And when you start getting lots and lots of things, going on with your simulator, I find it's a really good way to keep things all organized. Now, lastly, I wanted to just show that this question comes up quite a bit. If you look at my custom scenery folder, you'll see a lot of shortcuts in here, and that is no problem. The reason why I do this is because I have a solid state drive, which I have X-Plane on, and then I have a hard disk drive, which is my mass storage device, and it's really no problem. I have a folder on my hard disk drive, and then I just go ahead and copy shortcuts into the custom scenery file folder, and that works just as good as if they're being there naturally in that drive. So it can pick up shortcuts as well. So this helps you with storage management. I've got about, something like 1.5 terabytes, or no, something like that. Yeah, I have 1.5 terabytes of scenery. The vast majority of that is in orthos, and it's just a lot of stuff to manage right now. So and I don't want that. I can't possibly fit all that on my solid state drive. Now, some people do this with an external drive. They put all of their sceneries on an external drive, and then they shortcut into the custom scenery folder. So as you noticed with ExOrganizer, it had no problem finding those, and you can see that it called out where the scenery pack was at the shortcut location, even though the shortcut's in the custom scenery folder. So you see this airport's located on my hard drive, and it just tells X-Plane where that's located, and that's fine. Okay, so that's basically how you organize custom scenery. I wish I had better graphics to show you the layers and everything, but I didn't really have time to do that. Just remember that if you have any confusion about what layer goes on what, ExOrganizer basically tells you what order everything should go in to make it work just fine. And the order's right here. Your mesh first, your photo sceneries, your overlays, your libraries, any of your world to X-plane or over street maps, over world street maps, your regional sceneries, and then your airports on top. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of Father-Son Flight Simulator. I hope that this has been informative for you. If you're learning how to do custom scenery, then you might want to look into these tools. I will have all of these tools in the show notes below, so to help you find them. And that'll do it. So I'll see you next time on Father-Son Flight Simulator. Have a great day.